here has to know.
Yeah.
And then after you give us those, let's talk about some things that we can come along and put some meat on those bones so they can walk out of here with something great.
I love Pastor Chip. First of all, I think that it's the most important thing that you can do, and everybody can do this, is you need to be people who approach others with love.
That's
the
right.
greatest apologetic, by which I mean the greatest defense of the Christian faith, the greatest evidence for the truth of Christianity, is that we are people of love who approach other people with love. We're not just trying to win arguments. Now, the Bible does say that we tear down arguments. We tear down arguments with the truth, but we do that in a spirit of love. And so that's the most important thing. And oftentimes, whenever somebody brings intellectual challenges to the Christian faith, this isn't always the case. Sometimes those are legitimately what they're concerned with. But often what it is a smokescreen. And what they really want is someone to listen to them, someone to care, someone to love them, a sense of community like what you have here at this church. So love is the utmost important thing. And if you only take one thing away from this, that should be the thing. But that shouldn't get you off the hook of learning some of this heady, difficult stuff. So when we get down to the nitty-gritty of this and look at some evidences and arguments, I think there are three things. I think that every Christian, whether you became a Christian last weekend or you have been for 20 years, I think there are three things that Christians should be able to talk about in a sensible way. Even if you don't have a PhD, like I said, you're able to say some things about this. First of all is why we should believe that God exists. It's kind of hard for Christianity to be true if God doesn't exist. So we need to be able to talk about why it's reasonable to believe that God exists. Now that may sound kind of fundamental to you or simple, but atheism is on the rise, and so we need to be able to give reasons. Secondly, we need to be able to talk about the resurrection of Jesus. The resurrection is the historical centerpiece of the Christian faith. We hang everything. This whole game rests on the resurrection. It did for Paul. Paul said, if Christ be not raised, then we of all men are most miserable. So the fact of the matter is, we need to be people who are ready to talk about why we believe the resurrection of Jesus happened as a real historical event in space and time. So we want to be able to talk about that. Now, why those two things? Because if God exists and God raised Jesus from the dead, Christianity is true, period.
That's right.
So if someone wants to talk about what they think are contradictions in the Bible, errors in the Bible, rough things in the Old Testament, that why would God allow these things, or evolution, they can't give up their evolution, or whatever it is, whatever you want to say about all of those things, and those are important topics. But if God exists and God raised Jesus from the dead, those come secondary because Christianity is true, period.
That's right.
So those two things are very important. Now, the third thing, the reason I say the third thing is the problem of evil or the problem of suffering. Now, I don't know if you know what I mean with that, but what we're talking about there is if God is a loving, all-powerful, all-knowing God, then why do we see the pain and suffering and evil that we see in the world? Why did my child pass away? Why is my marriage falling apart? Why is there war? Why are there natural disasters? These are important questions. And the reason I include this in my list of three things that every Christian ought to be prepared to talk about is because it is the most common question you'll get from outsiders and unbelievers. In fact, you'll notice in the trailer video for this series, it was mentioned at least 3 times. It was the only thing mentioned that much. And that's appropriate because it gets raised all the time. So I think those 3 things we need to be ready to talk about in a meaningful way.
Okay, so we